In the world of heavy metal, rivalries have always added fuel to the fire, but few rivalries carried the same weight as the one surrounding Tony Iommi, the man who practically invented the genre itself. As the guitarist for Black Sabbath, Iommi built the crushing, doomy sound that defined metal. But he also carried with him a sharp tongue, a fierce sense of authenticity, and very little patience for musicians he thought had betrayed the music's working-class roots. It wasn't just creative differences, it was personal. For Iommi, heavy metal wasn't about technical tricks or costumes. It wasn't about selling a glamorous image. To him, metal was born out of grit, struggle, and raw power. And anyone who strayed too far from that? Well, they ended up on his enemies' list. So, today, let's dive into 7 guitarists who, according to those who knew him, made Tony Iommi see red. Coming in at number 7 is the Swedish virtuoso Yngwie Malmsteen, the pioneer of neoclassical metal. Malmsteen burst onto the scene in the 1980s, dazzling audiences with lightning-fast scales and a style deeply rooted in Bach and Paganini. But what impressed some drove Iommi up the wall. According to rock journalists of the era, Iommi dismissed Malmsteen's style as nothing more than classical music rape. He felt Malmsteen's obsession with speed and technical perfection stripped metal of its soul. For Iommi, metal was never supposed to sound like a violin recital. It was supposed to feel like the voice of the streets, raw and emotional. Malmsteen, in his eyes, had turned it into an academic exercise for people who wanted to feel sophisticated rather than shaken to their core. This one may shock you. Eddie Van Halen, one of the most influential guitarists in rock history, also found himself on Iommi's list of frustrations. When Van Halen's debut record dropped in 1978, the music world changed overnight. Eddie's two-handed tapping and pyrotechnic solos sent guitarists scrambling to keep up. But for Iommi, it represented something dangerous, not innovation, but a circus act. As some colleagues later recalled, Iommi criticized Van Halen's style as gymnastics, accusing him of turning the guitar into a flashy showpiece instead of using it to channel heavy emotion. To Iommi, Sabbath's music was about atmosphere and weight, about crushing riffs that shook your soul. Eddie, he thought, was making what he mockingly called happy metal for people who wanted the thrill without the darkness. At number 5 is Steve Vai, another virtuoso who embodied precision and technical mastery. Vai emerged from Frank Zappa's band in the 1980s and quickly became one of the most respected guitarists in the world. But respect didn't mean admiration, not in Iommi's eyes. To him, Vai represented laboratory metal, perfect, clinical, and soulless. While Sabbath's sound came out of broken amplifiers, scarred fingertips, and the desperation of working-class Birmingham, Vai's playing felt more like a computer program. Every note was flawless, but where was the danger? Where was the unpredictability? Their paths crossed in studios more than once, and by all accounts, Iommi didn't mince words. For him, Vai was proof that modern metal had become obsessed with technique at the expense of passion. This one highlights the clash of generations. Metallica's Kirk Hammett helped shape thrash metal, a genre built on speed, aggression, and relentless energy. To millions, Metallica carried the torch Sabbath had lit. But to Tony Iommi, they'd taken the flame and let it burn out too. Fast Iommi reportedly grumbled that Hammett and his bandmates had turned Sabbath's riffs into machine gun fire. He believed Metallica had forgotten the crushing weight and atmosphere that Sabbath pioneered, replacing it with raw speed and volume. To him, thrash metal was music for people with no patience, a betrayal of what heavy metal was supposed to be. Sliding into number 3 is Slash, the top hat-wearing icon of Guns N' Roses. Fans loved his style, his image, and his bluesy solos. But Iommi? He wasn't impressed, according to those close to him. Iommi dismissed Slash as a pretty boy playing dress-up. He felt Guns N' Roses had turned metal into a fashion statement, metal for MTV, as he reportedly called it. For Iommi, true heavy metal didn't need costumes or glam. It needed substance, menace, and authenticity. A backstage encounter in the late 1980s apparently turned tense when Slash tried to strike up a conversation. only for Iommi to fire off cutting remarks about musicians who confused style with substance. Now here's a rivalry that goes back to the very roots of heavy metal. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin is hailed by many as one of the godfathers of hard rock. But for Iommi, Page was not a pioneer. He was an opportunist. Iommi reportedly accused Page of taking blues music, playing it louder, and then claiming to have invented heavy metal. While Zeppelin basked in global fame, Iommi maintained that Sabbath were the true originators of the genre. The resentment ran deep, fueled by years of Zeppelin getting credit for innovations Sabbath had already made. For Iommi, Led Zeppelin wasn't metal at all. It was blues rock dressed up in heavy riffs. And the idea that Page was mentioned in the same breath as him clearly burned for decades. Finally, at number 1, the rivalry that stung the most, Ritchie Blackmore of Deep Purple and Rainbow. In the early 1970s, Sabbath and Purple were neck and neck, both pioneering the heavy British sound. But while Iommi stayed the course with dark, crushing metal, Blackmore eventually veered into medieval-inspired fantasy music with Rainbow, and, later, Blackmore's Night. To Iommi, this was betrayal. He reportedly fumed that Blackmore had thrown away the chance to be a metal god in favor of what he sneered at as Renaissance fair nonsense. Watching one of his peers abandon the very genre they had built together cut deep. For Iommi, Blackmore had traded authenticity for theater, and that was unforgivable. So there you have it, the 7 guitarists who, by many accounts, drove Tony Iommi up the wall. From Malmsteen's neoclassical flourishes to Van Halen's fireworks, from Vai's precision to Slash's fashion, from Hammett's thrash to Page's claims of invention, and finally, Blackmore's medieval retreat, Iommi saw each as a warning of what heavy metal should never become. Whether you agree with him or not, one thing is clear: the godfather of heavy metal never lost sight of where the music came from. For Tony Iommi, heavy metal was never about perfection, fashion, or commercialism. It was about the raw sound of working-class struggle, turned up loud enough to shake the world.